The afternoon sun hung like a brass coin above the town of Redemption Creek, bleaching the wooden storefronts a pale bone white. A wall of red dust rose from the desert floor as the stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the wayward Resaloon, its axles groaning in protest. The driver was shouting, his voice thin and ragged with urgency, but the words barely registered in the haze of heat and exhaustion. Sarah Catherine Walsh stepped down from the coach's wooden step, and the world tilted sideways. Blood dripped steadily from her left shoulder, soaking through the cream-colored silk of her traveling dress. Her gloved hand trembled as she gripped the coach rail, knuckles white. The town, dusty, lawless, utterly indifferent to her suffering, swam before her eyes. Saloon doors creaked on their hinges. Horses stood hip-shot at their posts, switching at flies. A man in a wide-brimmed hat watched from across the street. One boot propped on a barrel, but he didn't move. Nobody moved. "Anyone here know doctoring?" The driver called, already repositioning the horses. "Got a lady needs attention." More silence. Someone laughed, a dry, cruel sound from within the saloon. Sarah's vision blurred further. The wound in her shoulder throbbed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, each pulse sending fresh fire through her arm. The bullet had come through the coach window during the robbery 2 miles outside of town, a stray round, the bandits claimed, not meant for passengers. As if intention mattered when blood wouldn't stop flowing. She took another step, and her knees buckled. A hand caught her elbow before she crumpled to the dust. "Easy now," a voice said, graveled and low, with a cadence that held none of the cruelty she'd heard moments before. "You're bleeding like a stuck steer." Sarah looked up into a face weathered by years under the unforgiving sun. Slate-gray eyes, a jaw dark with 3 days of stubble, a scar running from his temple to his jawline. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense, but there was something about him, a competence, a quiet strength, that made her desperate mind cling to him like driftwood in a storm. "I need—" she began, but the words dissolved into a sound that might have been a sob. Doc Brennan. The man called over his shoulder, "Get yourself out here. We've got a casualty." No one emerged. The saloon remained silent, and the man's jaw tightened. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. His shirt smelled of leather and tobacco and something indefinably wild, the scent of the frontier itself. Sarah felt herself drifting, felt the strength in his arms, and for the first time since the gunfire erupted, she believed she might not die in this godforsaken town. He carried her through the saloon doors. The interior was exactly what she imagined from a refined upbringing in Boston. Dim, reeking of whiskey and sweat, populated by men whose gazes tracked them like predators. But none of them interfered. One man, an older fellow with physician's hands, looked up from his whiskey glass and rose without comment. "Jake," the man said, and it wasn't a greeting. It was an authority. "We need your room. Clean water. I'm going to need bandages and needle and thread." The bartender, a massive specimen with a scarred knuckle, nodded grimly. "Upstairs. 3rd door on the left. There's supplies in the cabinet." Sarah was lifted higher, carried up the narrow staircase. His breathing remained even. He wasn't even winded. She tried to focus on his face, this stranger who materialized out of the dust like an answered prayer, but shock was pulling her under like an undertow. "What's your name?" he asked, kicking open the door to a surprisingly clean room. A bed, a washstand, a mirror, a life in miniature. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Catherine Walsh. I'm Colt Meridian." He laid her carefully on the bed, pillows soft beneath her head. "And I'm going to get that bullet out of you, Miss Walsh. It's going to hurt like hellfire, but I've done this before. You'll survive if you don't bleed to death, and if infection doesn't take you. The odds aren't terrible." His honesty was almost more shocking than the wound itself. The physician, Doc Brennan, she realized, appeared with supplies. For the next hour, the world was nothing but pain. Colt's hands were steady as they worked, his fingers surprisingly gentle despite the brutality of the task. He spoke to her while he worked, his voice a low anchor in the chaos of her agony. "You weren't supposed to be on that coach," he said, threading the needle with practiced ease. "The Outlaws were after Peril. Indian contracts. He tied off a stitch. You were just bad luck. And you? Sarah gasped. What are you, Mr. Meridian? You don't seem like this. She gestured feebly at the blood, the violence. A smile crossed his weather-beaten face. Something sad and knowing. I was like everyone else in this town once. But then I learned that sometimes being tough doesn't mean being cruel. Sometimes it means helping. When it was finished, Sarah lay cleaned and bandaged, the pain reduced to a dull, manageable throb beneath layers of cloth. The sun had dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. Colt sat in the chair beside the bed, cleaning his instruments with methodical precision. You're going to need somewhere to stay, he said without looking up. Someone to change that dressing every day. Keep it clean. I have money, Sarah said. A little. I can pay for the room. Not what I'm offering. He finally looked at her, those gray eyes darker in the gathering dusk. There's a house about a mile north of town. Nothing fancy, but it's solid. I could use help keeping it. Cooking, tending to things. I could use... He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Conversation. Civilization. The kind of thing you clearly represent, Miss Walsh. Sarah's heart stuttered. You're not suggesting. I'm suggesting a practical arrangement, Colt said, and something in his tone reminded her that beneath his kindness was iron. You need shelter and someone to care for you while that wound heals. I need what happens when a man spends too much time alone in a hard country. He stood, moving to the window. The town was settling into darkness, lights appearing in the saloon like hostile eyes. My reputation isn't what you call clean. I've done things. Shot men. Tracked outlaws. I'm not a good man, Miss Walsh. But I don't hurt innocents, and that's more than most men out here can claim. Sarah studied him. The rigid set of his shoulders, the scar on his jaw, the way his hand rested on the revolver at his hip. Everything about Colt Meridian spoke of danger and loss. Yet he'd caught her. He'd carried her. He'd sat beside her and caused her pain only to save her life. Yes, she said quietly. He turned, surprise flickering across his features. Yes, he repeated. Yes, Mr. Meridian. I accept your arrangement. Because you're right, you're not a good man. She met his gaze steadily, though exhaustion pulled at her. But you're a kind one, and in the Wild West, I suspect that's the rarest commodity of all. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a loosening of tension he'd been carrying. He looked away, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. My name is Colt, he said. If you're going to stay in my house, you'll call me Colt. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of that house, no longer plain, but warm in the morning light, with new shutters and wildflowers in pots by the door. Her shoulder was healed to a white scar, a permanent reminder of the day the stagecoach brought her to the edge of death. And to Colt, he emerged from the corral, leading 2 horses, dust rising around his boots. When he saw her, his face changed, lightened. She'd learned that expression meant he was happy, though happiness seemed too small a word for what existed between them now. It had grown slowly, in the spaces between stitches being removed, in conversations by lamplight, in the quiet moments when he'd touch her hair or her face, as if confirming she was real. Ready for that ride I promised? He asked. She took his offered hand, and he pulled her close, not with the desperation of that first day, but with certainty. His lips met hers, tasting of sun and possibility. When they parted, he was smiling. Ready, she said, as they rode into the desert, the landscape unfolding around them in endless crimson and gold. Sarah Catherine Walsh understood something she'd never known in Boston's rigid, predictable society. The Wild West had nearly killed her that day on the stagecoach. It had given her life.